You ready? Okay. Well, welcome to the Transient Guest Tax Committee. I'm Elaine Schwartz, and the other committee member, state their name.
TJ Brown.
Okay. Councilman Harmon, Rich Harmon, is also on this committee, and he has a couple of cases in his real job before Judge Yeoman, so he said he would be probably a little bit late today. But we have no action items on the agenda at this moment, so we're going to go ahead and begin the meeting. And if you had an opportunity, and if you haven't yet, you might check out our website, because we have all the handouts for the meetings on the website, and you can look and see that we had the 2015 TIG guidelines, the 2014 Heritage Tourism Grant Awards Project Summary, the Historic Preservation Fund Ordinance, the Historic Tourism Committee membership for 2015, and the guidelines for the HTP and MG grant. So if you haven't seen those on the website, the city website, I sure encourage everyone to look at those. And what we discussed here today, I'm sure will also be added to the website. So the first thing on the agenda is, or the second thing on the agenda, is to approve the minutes from May 23rd. So I would entertain a motion, TJ?
Make that motion.
Okay. So the motion's been made, and I'll second it. And all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. So those minutes have been approved. The third thing on the agenda is the overview of the TGT fund and process. And Brandon Kaufman is going to present that from staff.
Good afternoon. You should have a copy of a presentation in front of you, and I can walk through that. This is basically a broad overview of the TGT funds and how they're distributed, what they're used for. So we'll start going through that there on page 2. So transient guest tax, there's a 5, 1, and a 1. So a total of 7% that's levied for transient guest tax. You can see there below, the revenues have varied from, in 2010, $1,839,000 up to 2014, $2,435,000. So we saw a 7% growth from 2014 to 2013 in total overall revenues. And I'll kind of walk through each of the 5, 1, and 1 on the upcoming slides. So those revenues are also on a cash basis, so there's no accruals or anything like that we would do on our typical reports. So the 5%, what is it for? This is what's listed in city code. So it's to support convention tourism, support city facilities connected with convention tourism, defray cost of providing operational services for convention tourism functions, create innovative projects and activities, and also to promote the general economic welfare of the city, including attracting industry. So pretty broad definition of what it can be used for. The 2015 budget was approximately $1.7 million for this 5% allocation. So there's $1,312,000 approximately for Visit Topeka. Then there's also $175,000 that's set aside for the Visit Topeka BID, and then also $200,000 that's set aside annually for the zoo. In addition to that 5% is 1% for historic preservation. So that 1% for historic preservation was authorized in 2002. It also sunsets in 2015 at the end of this year. That was originally earmarked for the Great Overland Station and Riverfront Park improvements, and then also historic preservation and generally. So Overland Station, they've been allocated approximately $94,000 a year with a cap of $1,175,000. So they're actually going to hit that cap in 2015, and I'll talk a little bit about what that'll do when we go to the distribution example. Riverfront Park, currently, or according to the resolution, they're allocated $106,000 annually with a cap of $1,325,000. So we're estimating that they will not hit that cap since they haven't historically been funded the full $106,000 annually. In addition to that, the property was not transferred during the 2012 Park and Rec consolidation, so the city still has title to that property. In addition to that, we're still sitting on some of the funds that have been allocated for that. So about 1.2 million has been collected, about 560,000 has been spent year to date from the inception. The current cash balance is about 606,000. Then also Shawnee County is holding 106,000 too. And then if you add in the 106,000 for the 2015 allocation, we're looking at a total of about 818,000 approximately that'll be available for improvements at the Riverfront Park by the end of this year. Then after that 200,000 is hit, everything else goes to the Historic Preservation Fund, and that varies year to year how much that is. That fund basically is set aside for funding, acquisition, rehab, and preservation of historical landmarks in the city, and I think Bill's probably going to talk a little bit more on that process, so I'm not going to go deeply into that. So the 5 and then the 1 and then the additional 1 that was adopted in 2012 for the Sunflower Soccer Association improvements that sunsets in 2032. So that was basically for 2 projects. The first project was for the extension of sanitary sewer to the property. And then the second project was to basically have a multi-function building with restrooms, concessions, pro shop, office space, and storage. In addition, the road improvements, the parking lot, landscaping, signage, shade, and then also 5 additional soccer fields. So we're estimating that's going to be completed by March 15th of 2015. So they're kind of wrapping up on that project right now. And we're looking at bonding in fall of 2015. The current funds available at December 31st, 2014 were approximately $559,000 that were available. We're estimating by the end of this year that could grow to about $916,000. So what we're planning to do is transfer that money to the Capital Projects Fund so that we can reduce the amount of bonding needs that the city will have in the fall. So essentially, when I went through this and started looking at the estimated cash flows moving forward with about a 1% estimated growth, it looked to me like there was a policy decision that needed to be discussed. And I'm not necessarily proposing that needs to be discussed today, but it needs to be addressed at some point in the future. In the fact that the bonds estimated, it will be lower, and that the revenue growth will be sufficient to not only pay off bonds, but that there's going to be more on top of that. So it's unclear specifically in the resolution what specifically that those excess funds would go to. So a couple of options there. You could look at reducing the bonding period instead of going out to 2032. I'm estimating that could maybe be paid off in 7 to 8 year time frame. So that's something that the committee will need to consider to get direction back to staff on.
Okay. TJ, do you have any questions about the process and how it works?
No, not at this point.
Okay.
Thank you.
So the last page there is a distribution example. So, and this is, for example, if we received $2.5 million for 2015, 71% of that goes to the 5%, 14% goes to the Sunflower Soccer 1%, and then another 14% goes to the 1% for historic preservation. The 5% is then allocated based on the budgetary split. So you can see Visit Topeka receives 78% of that, 10% for the Visit Topeka BID, and then 12% for the general fund. So if the city receives more than what was planned on in the budget, it's automatically allocated based on how the budget was planned. So if the city received more, then everybody would receive more when it's distributed. So for that 5%, we receive the money and then we distribute the money. On the 14% for the 1% of Sunflower Soccer levy, for example, if we receive 2.5 million, that'd be approximately 357,000 for Sunflower Soccer. That is currently being held in the Sunflower Soccer Fund and segregated for those purposes. And then the 14% that would be distributed to for the 1% historic preservation. Overland Station this year would be capped at 47,000 due to the cap that was set forth in the resolution. Riverfront Park would be allocated 106,000, and then historic preservation would receive approximately 204,000. So that's just an example there of how the cash flows once it's received. With that, I'll stand for any questions.
Well,
Go ahead.
I'm sure. I noticed I don't remember where I saw it, but there was a reference to the contingency line. How does that relate to, because I just heard you say that this is a strict formula and funds in excess continue to be distributed according to that formula. So can you bring me to speed on that?
Okay. So in the 2015, we included a contingency line, and basically what that was for was in case we did better than what we projected, that we would have enough budget authority that we could continue to distribute those funds so that we wouldn't have to go through the process that's outlined in state statute and hold the public meetings and everything, so that we've already got enough authority to continue the distribution of those funds. So for the actual distribution, we didn't count that contingency amount in. That just gave us more latitude and budget authority so that we didn't have to go back through the process to amend the budget.
Thank you.
So Brandon, the 2.5 million that we have, for the distribution, that has increased from 2010 when it was 1.8 million.
Yes.
So the fund seems to be doing well.
Yes, we've seen continual growth. Like I mentioned earlier in the presentation, there was 7% growth from 13 to 14. There was also in 2013, the implementation of the additional 1% also helped to grow that.
Okay.
And what we were receiving.
And then the breakdown, which it's always easy. This is very complicated, and I've been involved in a lot of budgets, but I mean you have to try and figure out where it comes in from and where it's going to. So the 511 breakdown, the 1% that's for the Riverfront Park, that's going to end. That's dedicated to that the end of 2015. So after 2015, we have to decide where that 1% is going to go.
From a policy standpoint, I think you'd have to consider whether or not you wanted that to end or whether or not it was continued.
Okay. So in other words, it could reduce the tax from 7% down to 6% if we, on the guest tax, it would reduce the tax.
Councilman Short, yeah, that is correct.
Okay. So that's something we would want to include from the Lodging Association, how that tax is. And where it's going. That's, I think that's one of the things that we wanted to bring up in this year is that 1% is ending the end of this year. So, is it the wishes of the committee and the public and the Lodging Association to continue that 1% or what to do about that? So, and then the Riverfront Park, I think in the discussion that we had, that money is just sitting in a fund and there has not been development yet from the Riverfront Park to use that fund.
That is correct.
Okay. So that's another issue that we possibly could be discussing as to what to do with that amount of money that's in there. And that was 600,000?
Approximately 600,000. We're expected that, well, with the allocation that Shawnee County is holding, and then with the 2015 allocation, by the end of the year, we're expecting that to be closer to 819,000.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, you've done a really good job of explaining that, and I think it's very difficult to try to understand how the breakdown is, but the 511 is what made it easy for me to understand. And I think that if we continue to think that way, that the 1% for historic preservation, the 1% for the riverfront park, and then the 5% that goes into tourism, that last year we awarded most of that to Visit Topeka, did we not?
That is correct.
Okay, and then Visit Topeka determined how that was to be awarded out. So I think we've had, the update on how that process works. So unless there's any objection, we're going to go ahead and move to the fourth. And we'll have, somebody asked me about comments from the conferees, and we'll have that at the end of the meeting, that if anybody wants to speak to any of the agenda items that we're talking about today. So with that, we'll move on to number 4, which is the Heritage Tourism Improvement Planning and Marketing Grants. And Bill, it's your turn.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was going to cover 2 items. First one is just to recap the 2014 projects that were approved last year under the Heritage Tourism Grant. These were for improvement grants, which are hard construction type costs. And then there's the more softer side of the program, which is for marketing and planning. So there was projects in each one of those I'll just touch on and update you on, and then we can move to the next item. As Brandon made point of, the monies, and this is the middle 1%, a portion of that 1% is what we're talking about here that goes to the Heritage Tourism Fund. So these monies are expended on projects that facilitate tourism by the preservation and promotion of the city's historical assets. So the first pot of improvement grants are for those hard costs of restoring and preserving. And these sites have to be on either local, state, or national registers. Okay, so there were 4 grants under the improvement category. And the first one was Shawnee County Historical Society. They had you had awarded almost $23,000 for an exit ramp and some lighting at the John Ritchie House. That is completed. That is one of 2 projects that are completed that were awarded. The second one was Topeka High Historical Society, almost $33,000 to repair damage to floors and walls and ceiling of their historical museum at Topeka High. That is partially completed at this point, but the improvements have been approved by 501. So that's moving forward. The third grant was Friends of the Free State Capitol for Constitution Hall, about $131,000 to strengthen floor joists, roof joists, and an external staircase improvement. These are under first phase of project design is completed. Strengthening of roof joists is in progress, so that is not a complete project yet, but they are moving along on that. The last improvement grant was for Central Congregational Church of about $34,000. This went to replace protective covering over their stained glass windows. And this is complete. Central Congregational Church, for you that don't know, has a Charles Sheldon room, which is open to the public. So, and that's just kind of a reminder I was going to touch on, is that every one of these applicants have to show and demonstrate how do they facilitate tourism. So sometimes that question comes up, but they have to show and demonstrate that. Okay, so that's, to recap, that was about 2 out of 4 projects complete. The remaining two were planning and marketing grants that went to Topeka Planning Department. One was for the downtown historic district nominations, which, as you know, is now been submitted to the state. And then there was also a historic resource survey for expansion of the College Hill Historic District. So that is complete or about to be complete this month. All in all, that totaled about $235,000, which was a little unusual just because that was 2 years worth of funding for those grant programs. With that, if there was any questions on the projects that were awarded last year, I'd be happy to try and help.
Any questions, TJ?
Not at this time.
What is the year, when is that year, what is the date of this grant award to be over? And what happens if there are any leftover unused monies from the grants that were awarded?
Well, this would fall in line with what Brandon talked about, which is this portion of the 1% will end this year. Collecting it will end this year. So we plan to continue the grant program with really no changes for this coming year, and then it would leave us with, I guess, a potential grant year as well in 2016 for the monies collected this year. So that's that. If no changes are made, that's how it would proceed.
So, Bill, when would the process start then for, which I think I've kind of read in some emails and stuff, the process is already beginning to get out another award of grants?
Correct, and that's what I was going to go over next, if
Okay.
that would be
Yeah.
okay. So yes, we want to kick off another process. We do need to get the committee's blessing, approval of the guidelines and the committee. So we didn't want to get ahead of that. The change, or there are no changes that we're proposing for the application and guidelines. If approved today, we would obviously get the word out as through, it's already on our website, but we would contact all past applicants and probably get a press release out as well, so everybody knows. If that goes as scheduled, then we're looking at a deadline of March 27th to get applications back to our department, and you would have a review by the Historic Tourism Committee in first week in April, I believe, April 9th, and then it would have to come back to this body later in April. So we're hoping, if all goes as scheduled, we would have decisions made and grants awarded by the end of April. And contracts then follow after that in May, and get people moving on their projects. So that's the proposed schedule. It's pretty much the same as last year. And as I said, there is no difference, but for those of you, just a little brief of that may not remember, because I don't always remember myself, so had to remind me. The funding is actually split for the there's two pots. There's the improvement grants, there's the planning and marketing. Improvement grants can, a minimum 85% of the leftover funds can go to those improvement grants. A maximum, a cap of 15% can go to the planning and marketing. We didn't hit that cap last year, but with our surveys. So again, eligible properties have to be on the state, national, or local landmark lists. The improvement grants, there's no match required. Although if you do propose match, that is definitely something that the committee would weigh. They really can go towards not only the improvements to the building, but also for your design as well. So it is quite flexible and wide open to apply for that. So that's the improvement grants. If there's any questions on that, the second pot, the planning and marketing, is simply the softer side, if you will. This could go for surveys, nominations, as we did for downtown. It can go for design guidelines of historic districts, and also any planning or marketing strategies of the individual attractions, historical attractions. So that is open as well, and no changes there. Again, same deadlines. Both of these pots are considered at the same time. So as we take in the applications and we forward them to the Historic Tourism Committee, which is the last thing I'll get into, they are considered at the same time. The last thing I just want to touch on is this is also for your approval. As part of the code, there's a Historic Tourism Committee that's required to make recommendations to you on those grants. And that's made up of the members of the Landmarks Commission, Lodging Association representative, and Visit Topeka representative. And then you actually approve the representative of Freedom's Frontier National Heritage Area and the Topeka Tourism Alliance. So we have put forth before you those names of those individuals. We have contacted and have made sure that those folks were willing to serve and can serve again. So we have that before you as well to approve. So with that, I think unless there are any further questions, that's all I have.
Okay. With the idea that we need to approve two different things here, the application process of the improvement grant and the application process of the planning and marketing grant. Last year when we did this, we had quite a bit of public input from this entire process and this application, which we always want to seek. And it seems that we have a good attendance here today again. So I would like to open it up to anybody from the public that would like to give any input to this application process as we did last year. And if there's any, it worked, it's already been in process 1 year, so we know that it works. So if anyone came to this meeting with the intent to, comment on anything that has to do with the application process, now's your time to come up to the podium and speak. Anyone interested? Chris? There's a podium over there.
Thank you, council members. My name is Chris Meinhardt. I was one of many attending last year, and the application process went very nicely. I was concerned, and some of the people, members of our Friends of the Free State Capitol, Inc., which I represent, were concerned that there seems still substantial misunderstanding of what is open to the public, and it is a requirement of the ordinance as well as the guidelines that properties be open to the public. And so I would rather, that is too big a subject for me, but I would like to just state some of what I've heard. There's a question among my members of the group I represent that is a church open to the public and is a school open to the public? And what else may constitute open to the public? Is having a room in a private commercial building that is open to the public, is that a historical attraction or something else? And if I may explain just a bit, we may speak at the end of this meeting on things that have been mentioned before, but I don't know your name, last name Brandon, but you've mentioned the Historic Preservation Fund. The Historic Preservation Fund, if I may just elaborate a bit, it's my understanding that it's an aggregate fund. And the particular bed tax portion of the funds that do flow into that fund, which may include CDBG, private donations, general funds, any other allocations, federal funds may be applied and diverted through that fund, are specifically not for historic preservation. When the ordinance has been changed many times, but the ordinance that collects those funds was never rescinded. And I was there, and it's always been a concern that we applied, many of us sought through the council a fund to do particular landmarks, the principal historic sites, along as was the Great Overland Station regarded a principal historic site project. We specifically, with the approval of council, the suggestion of council, did not use the word historic preservation. We used unique heritage of Topeka, unique historical heritage of Topeka, because there is such a confusion of what historic preservation is. And this fund, we promised, Mr. Youngs was there at the time, this is quite a while ago, but we worked very hard, and I don't feel we've been able to meet our commitment, as informal as it is, because there has been this confusion of what this money should be spent on. So I would like to just emphasize, my comments are based in that the collection of the funding that goes into the Historic Preservation Fund is not necessarily for all kinds of historic preservation. And I just can't emphasize how important that is to many people that I communicate with. I think we do need to set priorities, and that was an attempt to set priorities, to say, well, there are many, many buildings that are worthy of historic preservation, but not all of them are unique by federal National Park Service standards. And this city is required to use National Park Service standards by its agreement, an interlocal agreement with the Historical Society to, well, one example is through the National Historic Register program to review matters that may come before that. So I think there is a precedent for looking at priorities, and I don't know what your committee can do, but if you have any suggestions, I'd be glad to follow up on them. Thank you.
Any questions to Chris?
Not at this time.
Okay, Chris, wait a minute before you go. I just want to make sure that that we understand exactly what you're saying. The 1%, when we talked about the 511, the 1%, which the historic, on Brandon's handout here, he basically has historic, whether that's historic preservation. But what you're saying is that there's more money that comes into that historic preservation fund other than the 1% from the transient guest tax?
Yes, it was intended that well, I don't know if it was intended, but it was discussed and a hope that the Landmarks Commission, which was emerging at that time, it did not exist when this ordinance was created. It existed, but it was part of the Shawnee County government, so it didn't exist.
Okay.
So a different focus and the like. It was intended that requests be made for CDBG funds, which can be spent on historic preservation. One of the things I've asked one of your colleagues if, for instance, the Sumner School project is eligible to receive CDBG funds, because the owners in that case have not necessarily I'm not aware that they made a commitment to be open to the public. So I don't know if I'm answering your question, but am I?
Well, I'm trying to figure out if this 1% that you're saying that had other funds to come into it other than the transient guest tax funds.
Yes.
If that if that's what you're getting at, that never did develop.
Well, the 1% is for a specific kind of project, and it is perhaps not articulate as well as it could have been, but the context and the wording are so are substantial enough that some evaluation is worthy. Are the bed tax funds that are in the historic preservation account,
Right.
are they to be applied to everything that requires or may need historic preservation? And I just want to assure you, it's my opinion, of course, that it was not the council at the time, or my impression of the understanding of the Travel and Lodging Association, that any of the bed tax funds that go into this historic preservation account would be spent on general historic preservation.
Okay.
2 years ago, this has been an ongoing concern. I was part of a contingent that made a compromise with the city administration to spend some of this up to 15% on historic preservation purposes. And everybody was happy with that, but we're just a little still concerned that the bed tax money that flows into this account is maybe not going according to the council's policy.
Okay.
That is an administrative decision being made for every good intention, but it isn't working for the principal historic sites to get done. And made our commitment, however informal it was, to the Travel and Lodging Association to visit Topeka. So,
And the main concern that you started up with was the fact that those that are open to the public.
yes, and a site open to the public is, it was the wording used to represent a historical attraction, rather than a building that is worthy of historic preservation, but may not be open as a historical attraction. And the ordinance says primarily, and it really, that was something we all agreed on, primarily, for historic sites, for historical attractions. And, tie it back to the 2003 ordinance that says unique historical heritage. I live in a house that's on the National Register, and it's 110, 120 years old. I like the house. It is not a unique house. There are thousands of these all around the nation, many in Topeka, and many buildings that, like my house, that just are not going to be open to the public. Well, enough. Thank you.
Okay. Any questions? I think what Chris is saying, that it's already in the application process to be open to the public. So that may be something that we encourage the Historic Tourism Committee to make sure they consider. And I do want to say that last year I made, and I wanted to make sure it got in the record, that we were making an award to a church and a school, and that had never been done before. So that's something maybe for the historic. I don't think we need to change the application process or the language in it. So I would entertain a motion then if we're going to approve the application process for this year. Is that what we need to do next?
Yes.
May I ask
Sure.
a question first? I looked at both applications, and they're wonderfully laid out, and it kind of goes a little bit to what Mr. Meinhardt was talking about. When I jotted my note down before that, and I don't know, you're the expert on this, but I don't see anything here that really, unless I'm missing it, kind of gives us a quantitative understanding of what we expect the impact to be of the preservation. And I would think that would be one of the most important things to have in a process like that. So am I missing it, or?
Councilmember Brown, it's not specific. Well, I would, if I was filling this out, I would look at the tourism marketing strategy and talk about how this plays into bringing people to your destination, to the property, to the building. Not all of the buildings that we're funding are open on a regular basis, and some aren't finished. But it's worded so that it's intended to be open to the public. So as far as outcomes of how does this end up moving more people, is that kind of the
Yeah,
trend?
my understanding of historic tourism is we're trying to increase tourism. We're trying to make these sites and these structures attractive and cause more people to want to get off the highway and come here and go see those. So, it just seems to me there ought to be some way. I understand it would be an estimate, but there ought to be some way to do or include some form of an impact study on what are we getting for our dollar, and how soon can we expect to realize that. So
There is a portion, I slipped my mind there, we do ask for an estimated economic impact as part of their project management plan. So
that's
the
something.
strength of that in the application is weighed by the committee.
Okay.
We do ask for it.
So that's something that's included with the application? It's a separate
Yes, it should
document?
be part of the application,
Okay,
yes.
all right, thank you.
Councilman Harmon, any questions?
No.
Okay, so are we ready to entertain a motion on the application process?
Well, I'm the new member, and if the other members are comfortable with that answer, then I will support it, so.
Is there a second?
Point of order, are we considering both applications together or separately?
A good question. Do we want to do them separate, or did we do them last year together?
I would recommend we do them separately.
Separately? Okay. So we'll start off with the planning and marketing grant. That would be the cap of 15%. So TJ, you want to amend your motion to be on the planning and marketing?
Sure.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
Okay. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
So that one is approved. So the next one is the Heritage Tourism Improvement Grant application. Entertain a motion.
Motion to approve.
Councilman Brown
Second.
and Councilman Harmon seconds. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
So do we have those two process grants approved, and those will be ready to go out? When will these be posted?
As soon as possible. If we can get them out today, we will.
Okay, great. So then the other thing that we need to take action on is the Historic Tourism Committee and the members of that committee. Is there anyone here that wants to speak to that issue?
The name you have, sorry. Kurt Young, Executive Director of the Topeka Lodging Association. The name you have for the Lodging Association is Scott Ringham as president. That's currently Roger Fry.
Oh, okay,
Okay, so that would need to be changed.
okay. We'll make that change.
Roger or his
Thank you.
designee.
Okay, and Roger is with Ramada still? Ramada? Okay, I thought so, okay. Tim?
Can I just ask a question
Sure.
pertaining to the designee for the Lodging Association?
Okay.
And this goes to Mr. Young. Were you suggesting the
Uh,
name of the
Tim,
representative?
You want to come up and use the podium?
Yeah. Were you
Thanks.
suggesting the name of the representative be changed to the current president, or would it remain as Scott Ringham? Just the acknowledgement that he's not the president any longer?
Right.
But
Both. He is no longer the president. I am, so I would be the designee.
okay, all right, yeah, just to clarify that you would be the designee and not Scott Ringham.
Right.
Okay.
And I think it's important to list, I mean, and rather than just saying the president of the Lodging Association, we really need to list who that is, because all the other names are listed on the committee. So we would probably need to, is your term for 1 year or
Yes.
1 year? So each year that might change. Okay, okay. Okay, so we'll make that change on the description of the committee, and then we'd entertain a motion to accept the approval of this committee.
So move.
Okay, Councilman Brown moves and Councilman Harmon seconds. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
So those are the two things that we needed to take action on. And then we need to move on then to discussion on future distribution of funds. And is that Mary, Brandon, who's gonna? Number 5. Do we want to? Okay, so you might bring us up to speed first, Brandon, on the 5% that we're going to be looking at, how to distribute those funds. That process is part of the budget process, is it not?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay, so, and that will happen in May? I looked at last year's meetings, or the dates, and it seemed like it was May that we had meetings to discuss that.
Yes, that is correct. There was a meeting on May 23rd last year.
Okay. So is that what we will be doing this May? Okay.
That would be the plan, to continue to make sure that it flows in with the budget adoption process with the
Okay.
city council. So.
Okay. So our next meeting then to discuss this would probably be held in May.
Mhm.
Okay. Okay. Is there any questions on that process of the distribution of future funds? One of the comments that I had made earlier was the fact that we need to also discuss what we're going to do at the end of 2015, and then if there's any funds that will be coming in 2016 that relate to the guest tax that's collected in because some of it will come in 2016. So that may be something else we want to put on that agenda.
That's correct. The funds, so you continue to collect funds and then through 2015, and then there'd be a distribution in January of 2016 for the last quarter functionally of 2015.
Okay. One question I have had about the riverfront, I mean, has the Transient Guest Tax ever had them come and present out where they are in their development of the riverfront properties? I mean, I know that's one of the questions that's one of the funds that this is pertained to. So, City Manager?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Am I okay here? All right. So we have been evaluating that internally from a city perspective. We've gotten together and we outlined a list of questions that existed, what the status of the deed transfer, the funding mechanisms, and how we would make that work. We're probably 2 weeks to 3 weeks away from having the next set of information. At the end of that meeting, we're either going to be ready to bring back a recommendation to council on proceeding with that, or we'll make a determination as to when we're going to be ready. So at this point, I think it would be probably safest to defer that conversation until we complete that work.
Okay, so we'll defer that conversation until the next meeting. Okay, great. Is there any comment from the public as to Kurt?
Thank you, council members. My name again is Kurt Young. I'm the executive director of the Topeka Lodging Association. Since we've kind of been in an educational mode here, I want to take just a minute to maybe set the stage a little bit for future discussions. But I want to thank this Transient Guest Tax Committee and I've been involved in this long enough to see a huge amount of progress in the attention that is paid to the transient guest tax dollars and the effort that's put into making sure that they're directed to the places that they need to be. And for that, this committee and the city council is to be commended. So one of the things that we've strived for is consistency in how these dollars are administered and where that money is spent. It's real easy to lose sight of the fact that, hey, it's 7%, it's being paid by people that are staying in hotels, it's not really local people, and that's true. But by the same token, we want to be sure that those dollars are invested wisely, and we've seen a lot of effort to that end. One of the other things that's really changed over the last 3, 4, 5 years is a continued effort between the Lodging Association to work directly with Visit Topeka and make sure that we're on the same page in terms of how those monies can best be utilized to benefit the travel and tourism industry in Topeka. And we work very closely with Visit Topeka, and I think I can probably stand here today and say that I'm speaking for both organizations to a certain extent. So I told somebody earlier today, it's not very often you see businessmen, business people, I should say, volunteer to increase their base of taxes. And we did that in 2012, I believe, when we increased, voluntarily promoted with you all to increase the bed tax from 6% to 7%, with that 1% being earmarked for the Sunflower Soccer. And I think you're going to start seeing the huge benefits from that effort once that facility is done later this year. I think you're gonna see some real increases. And don't, as you look, and I'm glad somebody pointed it out earlier, as you look at the increased revenues for 2014, don't forget, compared back to 2010 or 11, don't forget that part of that is due to that 1% increase in the tax base, and that should be pointed out. We would continue to encourage, to the extent possible, that transient guest tax dollars be looked at through the lens of what is it going to bring to the community in terms of benefit from the travel and tourism industry. Topeka has always struggled with occupancy and ADR, and the only way we're ever going to increase that is through a continued effort of spending those transient guest tax dollars in a manner that increases the number of people coming to Topeka and the number of nights that they stay here. So, you know, we'll continue to be supportive of any effort with the use of these funds, as long as the end result translates to increased travel and tourism. I was waving my hand in the back of the room earlier before you voted on the heritage package, but the only thing I would add to that, and Bill, I know you've got a language in place that it has to be directly impacting travel and tourism. The one thing that I would continue to ask for is that there be some follow-up to that, to make sure that the dollars that are being spent on those projects truly are getting, as Councilwoman Swartz asked, are we getting any bang for our buck on those things? So the other thing, and I apologize for those of you that have seen me so many years standing here, but I'm going to say it again for maybe the new members of the committee. I like to think of the Transient Guest Tax Fund as my 401k for the industry. And it needs to be treated as no differently than that. It needs to be invested where it's going to have a return back to us. Because if you think only of that 7% transient guest tax, understand that there's a direct correlation between the amount of guest tax collected and the sales tax revenue that comes in as that guest tax increases. So if you increase the transient guest tax dollars coming in, you're going to see a corresponding increase in the sales tax dollars coming in. And they go hand in hand. So there's mutual benefit to everybody by seeing these transient guest tax dollars invested wisely. I noticed that back at the May 23rd meeting last year, the projection for 2015 was lowered from 2.45 to 2.3, and the distribution, or the budget for 2015, was based on that. You put a $93,000 contingency in there. We obviously came in very close to the 2.45 that we had originally projected. I think we're off to a good start this year. What would be the earliest that, or is there any intent to try and go ahead and consider advancing part of that $93,000 contingency and putting some additional funds in VTI's bucket for that?
I can speak a little to that. So the way that it's currently set up for the distribution is that when money is received, money is distributed. So we're actually not holding on to any funds of that 5% pot. So if we receive more, then all the participants based on that budget split also receive more. So there's never any, once we get an allocation, you know, once we get it processed, then there should be zero once it's distributed.
Okay, are we capped then for in any given year for the amount, I mean, are we gonna reach a cap in third quarter or earlier in the fourth quarter and not be able to, and have to work shorthanded because we've hit a cap?
In that situation, we could go back, and there's a budget amendment process that's laid out in state statute, so that we could go back in and increase that budget so that we could continue to distribute the funds.
Okay. And I think, thank you, that answers my question regarding that issue. There's been some discussion here today about the sunsetting of the 1%. I think 2012 was a good example of what the industry, the travel and tourism and hospitality industry could do when we came up with the project of expanding the soccer complex. I want to continue to see historic preservation issues addressed, just like everyone else that's here today in that arena. So one of the things that we will be doing from an industry perspective in conjunction with Visit Topeka is looking at other opportunities to maybe continue that, but in a different role, in a combined role, something. So fully expect us to come back at some point in time with some suggestions in that particular area. So I'll be glad to answer any questions.
Thank you, Kurt. The Visit Topeka put out a 2014 attraction attendance numbers, and I reported at one of the council meetings that it was very interesting to see the numbers that were collected. Number one was the zoo with almost 200,000 in first place. Number two was the state capitol with 101,000 visitors for the year. And number three was, which surprised me, was Old Prairie Town with almost 90,000 visitors for the year. And number four was the Kansas Children's Discovery Center. So do you see, would the Lodging Association be able to, in maybe a select time frame, ask guests what they were there for? I mean, what their overnight stay was for, so that we could start finding out with these attendance numbers, how many people are actually spending the night in Topeka to do that. I don't know if that's a possibility.
It's a possibility. It's something that we in the industry struggle with constantly because trying to identify why people, what brought them to Topeka. Mm-hmm. And we work on that, but it's something that we can certainly talk about and see if we can help provide some data along that line to give you some meat with your potatoes.
Okay. The first time that I heard the phrase "heads on beds" was my first meeting for the Transient Guest Tax Committee, and I think that's, that's where this money comes from, and that's what we need to continue to look at. So.
Well, both our occupancy and ADR are both up for 2014 over 2013. Not much, but they are up. The trend is headed in the right direction. So we need to do things that perpetuate that and continue that growth in the years to come.
Great. Thank you. Anyone else want to speak to? Can you state your name?
Hi, my name is Merle Riedel. I'm chair of the Landmarks Commission. So Councilwoman Schwartz, council members, good to see you. I just wanted to speak on behalf of our commission and encourage you to continue that 1%, extend that 1%, that 1% sales tax beyond 2015. I was part of the grant review process last year. It was a really interesting process. We had some good nominations. We had good discussion among the group going with that. And one of the things we often discussed was economic impact and the amount of visitors that this would draw. And we had members from the tourism industry that become sort of beef up the Landmarks Commission to become that bigger commission. And they do. They make sure that discussion happens. And we appreciate them, and they add a really strong dynamic to that whole commission as we're talking about these projects. So certainly that is a central issue that we discuss. We were pleased with the process last year. And I think one thing we hope to see in the future is even more applications come in, because we felt that this process adds an element or a window for some innovation in the types of heritage tourism endeavors that go on. So we think we would love to hear new ideas and new projects come before us. So I just hope you guys will consider extending that into the future.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
Hi, I'm Shaylin Murphy with Visit Topeka, and I just want to take the opportunity to answer your question about the attendance a little more fully. First of all, thank you for going through our quarterly report. I know it's quite long, but the attendance numbers are interesting. Those numbers are reported to us from the attractions. Some of them have various recording measures, which, some of the numbers are more accurate than others, just based on how they are able to record them. Visit Topeka, we are working on trying to beef up our survey process. When people ask us for information, sending out surveys afterwards, that will be part of the information in our quarterly reports this year. We would love to work with the Lodging Association even more on that, if there's a way to do that without cramping on the guest privacy. And then I did want to also just mention the Discovery Center actually does a really good job of getting a lot of information from their people. I think people are pretty patient when they go there, and they actually have numbers on how many people coming in are from out of town, if they're staying in a hotel, and how many nights. So that is a small segment of information that we could further get you to flesh out that a little bit. Okay. Just wanted to share that, and
Great.
Thank you for your time.
Do you have any update on Terry's replacement or the executive director position? I haven't heard. I haven't really called Visit Topeka lately.
Yeah, the search committee is currently working on that.
Okay.
They have got some very good applicants and are scheduling interviews, I believe, next week.
Great.
Next week,
Okay.
interviews.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. Anyone else?
Thank you. I'm Jeff Carson. I own a company called Gizmo Pictures. Around the corner, we restored the Thatcher building, 127-year-old building, and I'm a member of the DTI Board of Directors. I've been downtown for 5 years, and I've been very keenly interested in the development of downtown. The renovation of downtown is going to bring a lot of attention to the downtown, as did the Capitol renovation. But today, I am representing the Jayhawk Theater project, and I think that this grant application, as I read it, was written for the Jayhawk Theater, actually, because it is a gem, it is historic, it's on the National Historic Register. It will be advertised statewide and into Missouri, Oklahoma, Nebraska as a destination to come see films, live music, events like that. So I know it will put heads on beds, and I'm a big advocate of the idea that a project like ours, which is not going to go out and seek mill levy funding or anything like that, needs the support of this city. And the timing has not been good for the Jayhawk Theater, and we've not been able to get any real traction from the private funding community because there have been a lot of other really critical projects going on. And we are, we kind of feel like it's becoming very apparent that the missing link in the arts business is an art theater that shows films, so that we don't run to Lawrence and Kansas City to see a great independent film. It will have the capability to have a few little events and that sort of thing. It'll be a 900-seat, state-of-the-art movie theater, and we really feel strongly that the city needs to help us establish credibility. And so that when it comes time to decide where these funds go, I just would like to let you know that we'll be there to advocate for that. And we're friends with all these people. I'm on the Landmarks Commission. I'm wearing a lot of different hats all the time, but the real interest today for us and Doug and Mark Bernheide here is to represent the Jayhawk Theater. And I think
everybody's going to benefit from that getting a little shot in the arm. Thank you.
Thank you. That is a landmark, and I got a tour, and I'm really glad that it's called the State Theater, because I think that that will bring even maybe some funding statewide from that process. So, and I don't know if you've all done Spirit Expeditions, but I took the haunted tour, and Jayhawk Theater was on that too. So, but okay. Anybody else? Okay, well, I would entertain a motion to adjourn. I think
So moved.
so moved. We're adjourned. Thank you.
Like I said, I think the application is fine. I just want to make sure that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. That's
Well, that was